The captive alien. The cold, metal walls of the dungeon echoed with the distant hum of machinery, imposing, unforgiving, and stark. Lixera, the once proud princess of the Kesari Dominion, sat shackled to the floor, her body bent in defiance but her spirit dangerously close to breaking. Her silvery blue skin shimmered faintly under the dim light, a reminder of her alien heritage, now reduced to a mere shadow of its former grandeur. The chains that bound her wrists and ankles were not ordinary restraints. They were designed to suppress her innate abilities, her telepathy, her strength, her speed, all the things that made her a formidable ruler in her galaxy. But now, even those abilities seemed to betray her, buried deep under layers of suppression. The cell she occupied was tiny, almost claustrophobic, with bars that were too narrow for her to squeeze through. The cold seeping into her bones from the stone floor was nothing compared to the cold that had settled deep in her chest. She had been captured weeks ago by a ruthless warlord, Rogoth, who sought to use her as leverage in his campaign to conquer the galaxy. Rogoth knew well the power that came with controlling an alien royal. He had made it clear that Lixera was nothing more than a bargaining chip in his grand scheme. Her dark eyes narrowed as she stared at the far corner of the cell. The faint sounds of Rogoth's minions could be heard in the corridors, their heavy footsteps a constant reminder that her every move was being watched. She had tried to escape before, but the anti-psychic barriers in the prison blocked her telepathic powers. The more she struggled, the weaker she became. Her resolve had been tested more than once, and each time she felt herself slipping further into despair. "You are nothing," Rogoth had taunted her the day he captured her. "A weak, defenseless creature bound to the will of a greater power. Your people will bow to me, and you will watch as I destroy everything you hold dear." The words stung, but Lixera had long since learned to conceal her emotions. She was the leader of an entire species, a sovereign with untold power, and yet here she was locked in a cage with no way to break free. Her only solace was the quiet hum of her internal energy, the faint remnants of her strength that still pulsed beneath her skin. But even that flickered dangerously low. She needed an escape, and soon. As she sat, her thoughts drifting to her home, her mind was interrupted by a sudden noise, a slight shift in the atmosphere, the soft clicking of boots against the metallic floor. Lixera tensed, her sharp hearing picking up the faintest sounds. She immediately closed her eyes, searching her senses for any clue as to who or what was coming her way. Her breath caught in her throat. It was different from the usual guards, their heavy footsteps thunderous and predictable. This was something or someone smaller, lighter. A human. Her heart skipped. She had encountered humans before, but never like this. Could it be one of the rebel forces trying to rescue her? Could it be that someone had finally come for her? She heard the approaching steps grow louder, the faint sound of a key turning in a lock. Lixera tensed again, her body coiling in anticipation, ready to strike if it was another one of Rogoth's minions. But the door creaked open and a figure stepped inside. Lixera's eyes flashed open, narrowing at the silhouette in the doorway. The figure was tall, broad-shouldered, and clearly human. But what surprised her most was the look of determination on his face. No fear, no hesitation, just pure resolve. The human stared at her with a mix of awe and something else. He quickly moved forward, his footsteps calculated, as though he had done this 1,000 times before. Lixera's sharp eyes studied his every move. His black combat gear was smeared with dirt and blood, and the rifle slung over his shoulder was clearly meant for much larger threats than an imprisoned alien princess. He was a soldier, no doubt about it, but a soldier with a mission, and that mission was her. She didn't say anything at first, watching him carefully. Humans had a tendency to overestimate themselves. She had seen it time and time again, their naive belief that they could challenge forces far beyond their comprehension. But this soldier, this one felt different. The man stopped just a few feet from her, eyes never leaving her face. "Princess Lixera," he said softly, his voice raspy but confident. "I'm here to get you out." Lixera's heart fluttered for a moment. She hadn't expected to hear her name spoken by someone so calm. Most of the time, humans cowered in her presence or treated her with disdain. But not this one. No, this one was different. "Are you here to mock me, human?" Lixera asked, her voice icy but controlled. She had been humiliated enough. She would not show weakness. The soldier, however, didn't flinch. He stepped forward, pulling something from his belt, a small device she didn't recognize. "No mockery. Just a job. I'm here to get you out." Lixera looked at him closely. His stance was sure, his hands steady as he worked with the device on her restraints. For a brief moment she allowed herself to hope, something she hadn't done in what felt like ages. "There's only one problem, human," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You don't know what you're up against. The warlord has eyes everywhere. The minute you try to get me out of here, you'll be caught." The human didn't respond immediately. Instead, he continued his work, his brow furrowed in concentration. It was clear he was more than just another soldier. He was resourceful. "I've got a plan," he finally said, offering her a smile that sent a flicker of warmth through her cold heart. "But I need your help." Lixra couldn't suppress the skepticism that rose in her. "And why would I help you?" The soldier paused, then looked up at her, his gaze locking with hers in a way that was almost too intense to bear. "Because I'm not giving up on you. Not until you're free." It was a strange sentiment, but Lixra couldn't ignore the glimmer of hope that sparkled in his eyes. Perhaps, just perhaps, this human could be her salvation. And in that moment, something else stirred within her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in far too long. The escape begins. Lixra's eyes flickered between the soldier and the door. She had spent so long in isolation, subjected to the unrelenting cruelty of her captors, that the idea of escape seemed like a distant, impossible dream. Yet here before her stood a human, a soldier, who not only spoke of freedom but seemed intent on making it a reality. The sound of his voice had been steady, comforting even, and for the first time in weeks she felt the stirrings of something long buried within her, the will to fight, to live, to reclaim what was taken from her. The soldier, noticing her shift in expression, gave a brief, encouraging nod. "We don't have much time. They'll realize I'm here soon. I need you to trust me, Lixra. Can you do that?" His words, though simple, resonated deeply with her. In all her life, Lixra had been surrounded by those who sought to use her, to manipulate her for their own gain. But this human, this stranger, was different. He had entered her prison with nothing but the singular goal of freeing her. Perhaps for the first time in her life, someone was willing to help her without asking for anything in return. She let out a slow breath, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on her shoulders. She had always been the one in control, the one who made the decisions, who commanded armies and led her people. But now she was the one in chains both physically and mentally. Could she truly trust a human? Could she rely on this man to help her escape from the iron grip of her captors? Lixra looked into his eyes. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty there, only a quiet resolve that matched her own. And for a moment she allowed herself to believe that escape might be possible. "All right," she said, her voice low and determined. "I will help you." The soldier's face broke into a slight smile, a flicker of warmth in the cold prison cell. He quickly returned to his task, working at the shackles that bound her wrists. The device he held in his hand seemed like a simple tool, but she could see the precision in his movements, the way his fingers expertly navigated the mechanism. There was something almost instinctual about it, as though he had done this many times before. The seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity as the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder in the hallways outside. Lixra's heart raced in her chest. She had to admit, despite her growing trust in the human, the fear still clung to her. What if they were discovered? What if they failed? Finally, with a soft click, the shackles fell from her wrists. She flexed her fingers, feeling the rush of blood return to her limbs, the sharp sting of freedom coursing through her veins. But there was no time for celebration. The soldier, with his keen awareness, was already moving to the door, checking the hallway for any signs of danger. "Get ready," he whispered urgently, glancing over his shoulder. "We need to move fast. I've cleared the first few corridors, but we'll be exposed once we hit the main hall. Do you know how to fight?" Lixra hesitated. In her former life she had been a warrior, her combat prowess legendary among her people. But here, in this weak and vulnerable state, she wasn't sure she could summon the strength needed to defeat Ragatha's minions. The anti-psychic inhibitors had drained her of much of her power, and her body was weak from weeks of imprisonment. But there was something else. Something within her. A spark that refused to die. "I can fight," she answered with conviction, her voice steady despite the uncertainty that lingered in her chest. She had fought in battles before and she would fight again. The soldier nodded, clearly relieved, and signaled for her to follow. With quick, quiet movements, they made their way through the small cell block, their footsteps muffled against the cold metal floors. Lixra stayed close behind him, her senses alert, ready for any sign of danger. The corridors were dark, the only light coming from flickering overhead panels that buzzed erratically. They passed rows of empty cells, their barred doors echoing with the faint remnants of cries and desperate pleas. Lixra clenched her jaw, pushing the memories of her time in captivity from her mind. There was no place for weakness now. Ahead, the soldier paused at a corner, signaling for her to stop. He peered around the bend, his eyes scanning the hallways beyond. A tense silence stretched between them as they waited for any sign of movement. Lixera felt her heart thudding in her chest, the anticipation making the air around her feel thick and heavy. The soldier's hand moved to his side, reaching for a small weapon, a pistol, sleek and deadly. He turned to her, his voice barely a whisper. "We need to be quiet, fast. Once we're out in the open, it's going to get loud." Lixera gave a single nod, her gaze steady. She could feel the power within her stirring, the remnants of her Kesari heritage slowly beginning to awaken. But she would need to be careful. The inhibitors still held sway over her, and she couldn't risk overextending herself too soon. With a final glance, the soldier bolted forward, his footsteps quick and deliberate. Lixera followed, her body moving with the grace of a predator. They moved through the dark halls, avoiding guards and security systems, and for a while, it seemed as though the universe might actually allow them to escape. But the further they went, the more Lixera began to sense something else, something lurking just out of reach. There was a strange shift in the air, a sense of foreboding that she couldn't ignore. And then, as they turned another corner, it happened. A low, ominous hum filled the air, and a massive blast door slammed down, cutting off their path. "We've been detected," the soldier muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing in frustration. Lixera's heart sank, but she refused to give in to despair. She stepped forward, assessing the situation. The door was massive but not impenetrable. She could feel the faint traces of energy in the air, the same energy that had once allowed her to summon devastating blasts of power. Without a word, she stepped toward the door, focusing on the energy within her. Her hands began to glow faintly with a soft blue light, the remnants of her abilities pushing through the inhibitors just enough to make a difference. She closed her eyes, focusing all her energy on the door before her. The soldier watched in silent awe as Lixera's powers began to manifest. He could see the determination in her eyes, the fierce strength that had once made her a legend in her own right. With a final surge of power, Lixera unleashed a focused blast of energy, smashing through the blast door with a deafening roar. The metal buckled and twisted under the force, and the door collapsed, creating an opening wide enough for them to pass through. The soldier let out a low whistle. "Well, that's one way to do it." Lixera didn't respond. Instead, she rushed through the opening, her mind set on what lay ahead, freedom and the possibility of a new beginning. The heart of the rebellion. The rush of adrenaline that came with destroying the blast door quickly faded, leaving Lixera with a cold, intense focus. She could feel the eyes of the soldiers on her, their gazes mixed with awe and suspicion. After all, not many humans could withstand the kind of power she had just demonstrated. But there was no time for idle chatter. This was no longer just a prison break, it was the beginning of something much larger. The soldier, still with the sleek pistol at his side, gestured for Lixera to follow. His pace was rapid, deliberate, but not frantic. He was calm under pressure, a soldier who had fought in countless skirmishes and survived worse odds. Lixera found herself matching his pace effortlessly, the natural agility of her species taking over as they weaved through the corridors of the heavily fortified complex. The hallways were eerily silent now, as though the base had shifted from normal operation to full lockdown. The only sound was the muted clicking of their footsteps on the cold metal floors. As they passed by, Lixera couldn't help but notice the security cameras swiveling toward them. She hadn't realized just how deeply this facility was embedded with surveillance. Every inch was likely being monitored. Every action they took was being logged. And yet, the soldier, who she had only known for a few short hours, led her without hesitation, his confidence unwavering. "You're not just some random soldier, are you?" Lixera finally asked, her voice soft but curious. The soldier didn't flinch. He kept his eyes forward, his lips tight in a line. "No, I'm not," he replied, his voice steady but with an edge of something more. "I'm part of a rebellion. A group of us have been fighting the system for years. We don't have the numbers to take down the entire empire, but we're making progress." Lixera's heart skipped a beat. A rebellion? Against the empire that had imprisoned her? It made sense, but it also made her wary. She'd seen rebellions rise and fall countless times. Some were noble causes, while others were nothing more than an excuse for chaos. "And you think freeing me will help your cause?" she asked, eyebrow arched. The soldier shot her a glance, his expression hard to read. "We think you can do a lot more than just help us. You're not just any prisoner, Lixera. You're royalty, an heir to a fallen empire." Lixera's throat tightened at the mention of her past. It was true. She had been the daughter of one of the most feared and revered monarchs of the Kesari species, a people known for their fierce warrior culture. She had been groomed for leadership, trained to wield the power of her lineage. But that was before her world came crashing down. Before her family was slaughtered and she was captured. Her mind began to race, remembering the days when her people still had a presence in the galaxy. The Kesari were mighty, their warriors unmatched, their fleets a force to be reckoned with. And she had been their princess, their future. Now all of that was lost. Her people had been destroyed, scattered, and she had been nothing more than a pawn in the hands of the Empire. But this human, this soldier who had no idea of the weight of the title he had just invoked, was speaking of something she had almost forgotten: hope. Why? She asked quietly. Why would you think someone like me could help? I'm nothing now. He didn't respond right away. Instead, they rounded a corner and came face to face with a large, reinforced door. The soldier paused, his hand resting on the handle, and then turned to her. Because you're not nothing, he said, his voice firm, unwavering. You're the key. Your people's knowledge, their strength, it's all locked inside you. We need you to help lead the rebellion. To bring down the Empire from the inside. Lixra felt a sudden, deep pang of conflict. Could she really do that? Could she rise again as the leader she once was? The prospect was both thrilling and terrifying. And yet, something in her stirred. A forgotten part of her, the warrior, the strategist, the princess, began to awaken. She had been enslaved for so long, but perhaps there was still a chance to make things right. Perhaps this human soldier, this stranger, was giving her an opportunity she thought was lost forever. I'll do it, she said finally, her voice quiet but strong. I'll help you. The soldier's face softened slightly, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. He opened the door, revealing a hidden passageway beyond. The space was dimly lit, but the air felt cooler, fresher, like they were heading into the heart of the rebellion. This way, he said, and led her into the underground tunnels. As they walked deeper into the labyrinth, Lixra couldn't help but notice the markings on the walls, symbols she recognized. The rebellion. She had heard whispers of their movements before, but never had she imagined she would be a part of them. The underground passage seemed endless, twisting and turning, leading her deeper into the heart of what was quickly becoming her new reality. Eventually, they emerged into a large cavernous chamber filled with soldiers, engineers, and what appeared to be prisoners, all gathered in a bustling operation. There was an energy in the room that Lixra had not felt in years, a sense of purpose, of defiance against the forces that sought to crush them. The soldier, whose name she had yet to learn, led her to a raised platform at the center of the room. Atop the platform sat a woman, her face marked with years of struggle but also strength. Her uniform was different from the others, dark, tactical, and commanding. She stood with a confidence that made Lixra immediately respect her. This is Commander Vala, the soldier said, motioning to the woman. She's the one leading the rebellion. Vala, this is Lixra. Vala's eyes narrowed as she studied Lixra, sizing her up with a calculating gaze. The silence that passed between them felt thick, laden with unspoken thoughts and questions. Finally Vala spoke, her voice calm but piercing. We didn't expect you to come so soon, she said, stepping down from the platform. But if the stories about your people are true, then you're our greatest asset. The time for action is near. Are you ready to join us? Lixra took a deep breath, her heart beating faster as the weight of her decision settled upon her. She had once ruled with fear and respect. Could she lead once more, this time for something greater than herself? With a final glance at the human soldier, her new ally, she stepped forward, her voice steady. I am ready. And in that moment the world shifted. The weight of the past might have crushed her, but Lixra was no longer just a princess, a prisoner, or a lost soul. She was a leader once more. The burden of leadership. Lixra stood among the rebels, surrounded by a mix of familiar and unfamiliar faces. The hum of machinery, the soft clangs of tools, and the distant murmur of conversations created a strange symphony in the air. The base was alive with activity, but it felt different now. This was no longer just a refuge for the displaced. It was a home for the resistance. And here, in the heart of their war effort, Lixra was to take her first steps back into the role she had once abandoned. Vala, the commander, had given her time to adjust, but the pressure was building. Everyone in the room was waiting for her decision, her next move. The rebellion wasn't just a military campaign, it was a war of ideals, a battle against an empire that had crushed the hopes of entire species. Lixra felt the weight of her people's legacy on her shoulders, but it was no longer a burden she couldn't bear. She had something now that she hadn't had for years: purpose. Vala led Lixra to a side chamber, away from the prying eyes of the soldiers and engineers working tirelessly to prepare their next strike against the Empire. The air in the room felt thick with anticipation as the commander turned to face her. "You understand the stakes," Vala said, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. "This isn't just about taking down a few bases. We're going to be fighting a full-scale war against the Empire. If you truly want to lead, you need to be ready for what comes next. The loss, the sacrifice, it's all part of the process." Lixra nodded, her mind already churning with the possibilities. She had always been a strategist, calculating the long-term consequences of every decision. She wasn't a stranger to war, she had grown up in the shadow of it. But this was different. The rebellion wasn't fighting for conquest or power. They were fighting for survival. And Lixra had never fought for something so deeply personal. "I'm ready," she said, though the words felt heavier than she expected. "I'll do whatever it takes." Vala gave her a steady nod as if she had expected nothing less. Then she motioned to a large holographic map that flickered to life in the center of the room. The map displayed the galaxy with key systems marked in red, each one a target for the rebellion. "Here's where we're striking next," Vala continued, pointing to one of the red markers. "The Empire has a stronghold here. It's a vital supply route for them. If we can take it, we can cripple their operations across several star systems. We'll need to move fast, hit hard, and then vanish before they can retaliate." Lixra's mind raced as she studied the map. She recognized the system, Verdun. It was one of the Empire's most heavily fortified sectors. The thought of attacking such a stronghold was daunting, but she knew the rebellion had no choice. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. "How many ships do we have?" she asked, her voice calm but demanding. Vala hesitated for a moment, her eyes narrowing. "Not many. We've got a few stolen cruisers, a couple of stealth ships, and some smaller fighter craft. But they're nothing compared to the Empire's fleet. This will be a guerrilla operation. We hit them quickly and retreat before they can counterattack." Lixra absorbed the information, her strategic mind already processing the best approach. It would be risky, but it was their best chance to make a meaningful strike against the Empire. "We can't afford to fail," Lixra said, her gaze sharp as she turned to face Vala. "What's the plan for getting in?" "We'll need a diversion," Vala replied. "The Empire sensors are too advanced to just slip past undetected. We'll have to draw their attention elsewhere. While they're distracted, we'll infiltrate their defenses, sabotage their infrastructure, and disable their command structure." Lixra nodded again, already envisioning how the operation could unfold. A diversion would be crucial, something that would pull the Empire's attention away long enough for their forces to break through. "And the Empire's reinforcements?" she asked, already calculating how long they could afford to stay before the Empire sent reinforcements. "Once we engage, they'll send everything they've got," Vala said grimly. "But that's where you come in. You're the key to our success. Your reputation, your heritage, your connection to the Kesari, it'll draw attention. They won't be able to ignore you." Lixra's eyes darkened as she heard the weight of those words. Her bloodline, her legacy, she had hoped it would remain buried, but the truth of who she was couldn't be hidden forever. It would be both a weapon and a liability. The Empire wouldn't just view her as a symbol of rebellion, they would see her as a threat that had to be eliminated. She steeled herself for what was to come. There was no turning back now. "I'll do what I must," Lixra said, her voice steady, though inside she felt the familiar sting of uncertainty. The role she was about to take on was fraught with danger, but it was one she was born for. Vala smiled slightly as if she had been expecting this. "Good. We'll move out within the hour. Get ready." As Lixra turned to leave the chamber, her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps behind her. The soldier, the one who had freed her from her prison, the one who had stood by her side, was approaching with a determined expression on his face. "Lixra," he said softly, his tone carrying a hint of concern. "I know this isn't easy. What we're doing, it's going to get worse before it gets better. But you don't have to do it alone." Lixra glanced at him, her heart unexpectedly stirred. She had never allowed herself to rely on anyone. Trust had always been a luxury, one she couldn't afford. But in this moment, as they prepared for what could be the most dangerous mission yet, she realized that she didn't have to do this alone. "You're right," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "I won't." The rebellion may have started as a group of desperate fighters, but with her leadership, and with the support of those who believed in her, they had a chance. A real chance to topple the Empire. And Lixra was no longer the fallen princess she once thought herself to be. She was a leader, a warrior, and the future of her people. The storm approaches. The moment had arrived. Lixra's heart thudded in her chest as she stood on the command deck of the stolen cruiser, the rebel fleet now gathered around her. The cold light of distant stars flickered through the viewports, illuminating the faces of those who had come to fight under her command. Vala stood beside her, her stoic demeanor a sharp contrast to the nervous energy that seemed to pulse through the room. Lixra could feel it too, the tension in the air, the gravity of their mission weighing heavily on her. The plan was simple, but its execution would be anything but. Strike hard, fast, and disappear before the Empire could respond. It was the perfect guerrilla tactic, and Lixra knew it was their best chance at striking a blow to the heart of the Empire. But as the target loomed ahead, Lixra couldn't shake the sense of uncertainty gnawing at her. "Captain, all ships are ready," Vala's voice broke through her thoughts. Lixra turned to face the commander, her gaze firm. "Good. Let's make sure they know we're here," she said, her voice low but confident. Vala gave a brief nod before addressing the bridge crew. "Set course for Verdun's outer rim. Engage stealth mode immediately." The crew sprang into action, the hum of the ship's systems clicking into place. Lixra felt the ship shift as the stealth protocols activated, cloaking them from the prying eyes of the Empire's sensors. The moment was crucial. The Empire's defenses on Verdun were formidable, and a single misstep could spell disaster. But this was Lixra's plan, and she had every confidence in its success. "We won't have much time," Vala said, stepping closer to Lixra. "Once we engage, we need to move quickly. The diversion has to be timed perfectly." Lixra nodded, her mind racing as she thought of their next steps. The diversion, crafted by the most cunning tacticians in the rebellion, was set to begin the moment they entered the Verdun system. A series of false signals would lead the Empire's patrol ships away from the primary target, allowing the rebels to slip past and infiltrate their defenses. But there was more to this than just strategy. The key to their success wasn't just stealth, it was the element of surprise. The Empire wouldn't expect an attack from a force so small. And Lixra knew that if they played their cards right, they could take down the Empire's stronghold before reinforcements even had time to react. She took a deep breath, centering herself. Her heart had settled into a rhythm, and she could feel the pulse of the rebellion around her. This wasn't just a battle, it was a fight for her people's freedom. And for the first time, Lixra could see the path forward, a path where the Empire's oppression would no longer define her world. The plan was set in motion. The rebel fleet moved into position just beyond the edge of the Verdun system, cloaked by stealth technology that rendered them invisible to the Empire's sensors. Lixra watched through the viewport as the familiar stars glowed around them, their light seemingly dimmer in the shadow of their mission. From here it was a waiting game. The diversion would be the first signal. Several miles away, a smaller group of rebels would engage the Empire's outer defenses, setting off a cascade of false alarms and causing confusion. It would draw the Empire's forces away from the central base, buying the main fleet just enough time to infiltrate and strike the heart of Verdun. Lixra felt the ship's slight movement as they advanced deeper into enemy territory. She felt a ripple of nervousness through her, but she quickly squashed it. The stakes were high and she couldn't afford hesitation now. Then it came. The signal, faint at first but unmistakable. The diversion was working. The Empire's ships, now several miles away, were scrambling to investigate the sudden disturbance. Lixra's heart quickened as the opening she'd been waiting for arrived. She gave the order. "All ships move out," she said firmly, her voice a quiet command that cut through the silence. Stealth mode off. Full speed ahead. The cruiser surged forward, its engines roaring to life as it left the cloaking field behind. One by one, the other ships in the fleet followed suit, breaking their stealth to engage the Empire in full force. There was no turning back now. Vala's voice rang through the comms. "Lixra, we've got your back. Good luck." Lixra didn't respond. There was no need for words now. The mission had begun. The Verdun stronghold appeared before them, an imposing structure surrounded by layers of energy shields and defense turrets. The sheer scale of the Empire's military power was overwhelming, but Lixra's resolve remained unshaken. She had fought battles before, but this one was different. The lives of her people, and the future of the rebellion, hung in the balance. "Deploy the ground forces," Lixra ordered. "We need to take their communications hub first. Disable their ability to call for reinforcements." Her crew sprang into action, the rebel fighters moving swiftly to the surface of Verdun, their ships descending toward the heavily guarded facility. As the ground forces engaged the enemy, Lixra's eyes narrowed. The first phase of the plan was a success. But it wasn't over yet. The real challenge was about to begin. Lixra's ship moved in closer to the stronghold, its weapon systems primed. "Ready the artillery," she commanded. "We're going to hit them hard." As the rebel fleet prepared for the final phase of their assault, Lixera felt a surge of adrenaline. This was their moment. A single strike could change the course of the rebellion, but it could also be their last stand if they weren't careful. The rebels were outnumbered, outgunned, and on the verge of something far greater than they could have imagined. As the first wave of energy blasts shot out, Lixera watched through the viewport, knowing the risk, but also feeling the weight of destiny settle on her shoulders. Her people's future rested on what happened next. And Lixera wasn't about to let them down. The final blow. The battle raged on beneath them as Lixera stood at the helm of her ship, watching the chaos unfold. The rebel fleet had managed to breach the outer defenses of the Verdant stronghold, but now came the true test. With every blast that shook the air around them, with every enemy ship falling to the relentless assault, she could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down harder on her shoulders. The fate of the rebellion, the lives of millions. This was her moment to make sure that all of it didn't go to waste. But she couldn't do it alone. "Captain, we're running out of time," Vala's voice crackled over the comms. "We've breached the core defenses, but their central control system is heavily shielded. We need to disable it or we won't make it out alive." Lixera's gaze locked onto the massive structure looming in front of them, its dark, intimidating silhouette against the brilliant, burning stars. The heart of the Empire's power and the heart of their enemy. The central control system was buried deep within the stronghold, heavily guarded, surrounded by a labyrinth of turrets and shields. But Lixera knew one thing. This was their chance, and if they didn't seize it now, they would lose everything. She turned to Vala, her expression resolute. "Tell the ground forces to prepare for a full assault," she said, voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at the edges of her mind. "We'll take it from here." Vala hesitated for only a moment before giving the order, her tactical brilliance evident in the calmness of her voice. "Understood, Captain. We'll cover you." With the ground forces engaging the enemy on the surface, Lixera led her ship into the final assault. It was time to strike at the heart of the Empire, to break their control over the system, and to finally give the rebels a chance at victory. The air was thick with the hum of energy as Lixera's ship cut through the atmosphere, heading directly for the central control complex. Enemy fire rained down on them, but she ignored it, her focus unwavering. She had one goal: take out the Empire's command center. Everything else would fall into place afterward. "Prepare for impact," Lixera said, bracing herself for the turbulence ahead. She could feel the ship tremble as they neared the target. A few more moments and they would be in the heart of the battle. The tension was palpable, the seconds stretching on as if in slow motion. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light cut through the darkness, signaling the final strike against the stronghold's shields. It was the moment they had been waiting for. The shields flickered and began to collapse, their power waning under the barrage from the rebel fleet. Lixera gave the command. "Full power to the forward cannons. Target the control center." The ship's weapon systems hummed to life, and with a precise and calculated movement, the weapons unleashed a concentrated blast that tore through the weakening shields of the Empire's central command. The explosion rocked the stronghold, shaking the very ground beneath them. But it wasn't enough. As the dust and debris began to settle, Lixera's eyes scanned the battlefield, looking for any signs of weakness. The Empire's retaliation was swift, and she could see their reinforcements closing in from the distance. Time was running out. "This is it, Captain," Vala's voice echoed once more through the comms. "We've got one shot. The secondary shield generators are in position, but we need to disable them before we can get through." Lixera's gaze hardened as she made a decision in an instant. "Pull back. We'll handle it ourselves." With no time to waste, Lixera ordered her ship to veer away from the immediate assault. They had to make it to the secondary shield generators, an unguarded blind spot in the stronghold's defense. The path was treacherous, littered with enemy craft, but Lixera trusted her crew and herself. If they could breach that weak point, they would be able to deliver the final blow. The rebel fleet, now with limited resources, followed her lead. Their remaining ships regrouped, their movements coordinated with deadly precision. Lixera watched the chaos of battle in the distance but refused to be distracted. She had one goal: finish this fight once and for all. They reached the secondary shield generators in record time. With the power of their cannons at full charge, they fired once more, hitting the vulnerable point with surgical precision. The shields buckled and collapsed under the assault. "We've done it," Vala said, her voice carrying a note of triumph. "The core defenses are down." Lixera didn't waste a moment. "Now we finish this." With the final barrier out of the way, Lixera led the charge, her ship tearing into the heart of the command center. The control system flickered as the Empire's systems began to fail under the sustained assault. A massive explosion erupted from within the stronghold, and the lights of the Empire's once indomitable fortress began to dim. But just as they thought victory was within their grasp, the ground shook once again. Lixra's eyes widened as she saw something unexpected. A new fleet emerging from the shadows, massive ships coming out of the edges of the system, their weapons locked and loaded. It was the Empire's last attempt to wipe out the rebels. Lixra's heart pounded. But she didn't hesitate. "Give everything you've got," she shouted into the comms. "We're not backing down now." And with that, the final battle began. The clash of weapons rang through the space around them. A massive energy wave pulsed from the Empire's reinforcements, and Lixra's ship was rocked to its core. She gripped the controls tightly, refusing to let her resolve falter. Her people were counting on her, and she would not let them down. With every ounce of strength they had, the rebels pushed forward. The ground forces held their position while the fleet engaged the Empire's reinforcements, with Lixra in the thick of the action. Every blast from the Empire felt like a hammer against their will to survive, but Lixra could feel the strength of the rebellion pulsing through her. They would not be defeated. Not now. The final assault was relentless. The Empire's forces were strong, but Lixra and her rebels were stronger. They fought with the fury of those who had nothing left to lose, and everything to gain. With one final push, the Empire's forces faltered. Their ships began to retreat, and the central command center finally crumbled under the pressure. Lixra watched as the massive structure that had once symbolized the Empire's unyielding power fell to the ground. A triumphant cheer erupted across the fleet. "We did it," Vala said, her voice filled with awe. Lixra stood still for a moment, watching the results of their hard-fought battle. The rebellion had claimed its victory, and with it, the beginning of a new era for the galaxy. It wasn't over yet, there would still be more battles to fight, but today they had won something far greater than just a single fight. They had won the future. And Lixra knew that no matter what came next, the rebels would rise to face it. Together.